My husband Julian brought his mistress home from their romantic trip to Bali, not knowing I had sold our beautiful Manhattan loft the week before. That's the story everyone knows, the one that made the society pages. But that's not the best. That's not even the beginning of the end. It's just the moment the curtain finally life I thought I had built. My name is Ilara Vance. To the outside world, I was a success story. A top-tier interior designer with a waiting list of clients whose names you'd recognize from Forbes. Our Soho loft was my masterpiece, a testament to my craft. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a skyline view that could break your heart. Every piece of art, every custom sofa, every silk rug was chosen by me, paid for by the business I built from the ground up. Julian was the charming accessory to my success. He was handsome, smooth, the kind of man who could sell sand in the desert. He told everyone, including me, that he was a brilliant financial consultant, managing the fortunes of the wealthy. We were the perfect couple, smiling for cameras at galas, vacationing in St. Bart's, living a life that felt like a movie. I believed in that movie. I poured my heart into it, but all movies end. And mine ended with him standing in the hallway of the building he no longer lived in, his key useless in the lock, with a younger woman by his side and confusion turning to panic in his eyes. He thought he was coming home. He had no idea I had turned our home into my escape route. This is the story of how I discovered the lie I was living in, and how I burned it all to the ground to save myself. It's a messy, painful story, and telling it all is going to take everything I have. So, if you want to hear how it all unfolded, stick around. Make sure you're following along, so you won't want to miss what happened next. Before the storm, beautiful, meticulously designed, our life ran on a schedule that I curated to feel effortless. Tuesdays were for gallery openings, Fridays for intimate dinners with people whose influence shaped the city, and Sundays were for us, strolling through Central Park or just wrapped in cashmere blankets in the loft, watching the city lights flicker on. I loved that feeling of order, of control. It was my brand, both personally and professionally. I thought our foundation was solid, built on trust and shared dreams. I was so wrong. A foundation built on lies is just sand, waiting for the tide to come in. The tide began to turn on a rainy Monday afternoon. I remember the sound of the rain lashing against the massive windows of our living room. It was my designated admin day to catch up on invoices and budgets. I was sitting at our marble kitchen island, a cup of green tea steaming beside my laptop, reviewing our joint credit card statements. It was a routine task, as mundane as watering my orchids. But then I saw it. A charge that didn't belong. It wasn't the amount that caught my eye, though it was substantial. It was the vendor. Lumiere Jewels, Miami. My brow furrowed. I clicked for details. The charge was from the previous Tuesday. Immediately pulled up Julian's calendar, which we shared. Last Tuesday, he was in Chicago for a 2-day tech conference. I knew his schedule by heart. He'd even called me from his hotel room to complain about the deep dish pizza. A cold little knot formed in my stomach. Miami wasn't on the way to Chicago. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was an online purchase, but the transaction was coded as an in-store purchase. For a few minutes, I just stared at the line on the screen, the rain outside suddenly feeling colder. That evening, when Julian came home, he was his usual charming self. He kissed my forehead, unknotted his tie, and went straight to the bar cart to pour himself a whiskey. He swirled the amber liquid in the crystal glass, the picture of a man without a care in the world. I waited until he was settled on the sofa, his feet up on the ottoman I'd had custom made. I kept my voice light, casual. I told him I was just going over the finances, and a strange charge popped up from a jeweler in Miami. He didn't even flinch. He laughed. It was a warm, gentle sound that instantly made me feel foolish. He told me, with a twinkle in his eye, that I was so that I'd just ruined my own anniversary surprise. He said the jeweler's parent company was based in Miami, that's all, and he'd been planning it for months. He looked so genuinely disappointed in me for spoiling it. He was so convincing, so smooth, that my guilt washed over my suspicion. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. I apologized. I actually apologized for questioning him. For a few weeks, it worked. I pushed the doubt down, telling myself I was becoming paranoid, that a man this loving deserved my trust. The real crack, the one that shattered the entire facade, came about a month later. Julian was supposedly in Boston for an overnight trip to meet a potential new client. He was texting me updates, telling me how boring the train ride was. That evening, I was tidying up the living room, and I picked up his tablet from the coffee table to put it on its charger. As my fingers touched the cool glass, the screen lit up. A single notification was displayed on the lock screen. It was from a booking website. It said, "Thank you for your stay, Julian. We hope you enjoyed Villa Azure. See you again in the Hamptons soon." My heart didn't just drop. It stopped. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. The sounds of the city outside, the distant sirens, the hum of traffic, faded into a deafening roar in my ears. The Hamptons, not Boston, a villa, not a business hotel. He had lied. He had looked me straight in the eye, kissed me goodbye that morning, and lied. The Miami jewelry charge came rushing back. No longer a simple misunderstanding, but the first chapter in a story I suddenly realized I knew nothing about. He wasn't just a liar, he was a good one. And as I stood there, frozen in the middle of my perfect living room, a terrifying thought crystallized. This wasn't the first lie. It was just the caught. The night I saw that tablet notification, I didn't sleep. I lay perfectly still in our bed, feeling the warmth of Julian's body next to mine. It felt like I was lying next to a lit bomb. Every slow, steady breath he took felt like a tick on a time. The man beside me, the man whose scent was on my pillows, was a complete stranger. The shock didn't curdle into tears. It froze into something hard and sharp in my chest. Resolve. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to get answers. The next morning, I waited until he left for the office, kissing me goodbye with the same lips that had probably kissed her just days before. The moment the door clicked shut, I walked straight to my home office and called Chloe. She's my best friend, but she's also the sharpest divorce attorney in New York. Her voice was warm until I started talking. My own voice was low, trembling slightly as I told her everything. The jewelry in Miami, the villa in the Hamptons. Chloe didn't offer platitudes or tell me I was jumping to conclusions. She listened, a long silence on the other end of the line. When I was finished, she didn't say, "I'm so sorry." She said, "Okay, don't confront him, don't change your routine, don't do anything until we have facts. I know a guy. His name is Marcus. He's discreet, and he's the best." Meeting a private investigator feels exactly as surreal as it does in the movies. His office was a small, nondescript room in a boring building in Midtown. He looked more like an accountant than a detective. I sat across from him, my hands clutched around a hot cup of tea he'd made me, and I laid out the ugly, fragmented pieces of my suspicion. I felt a wave of shame, like I was airing my dirty laundry to a stranger, but Marcus was completely impassive. He just listened, took notes, and told me he would be in touch within a week. The act of writing him that check felt like crossing a line. I had officially declared a silent war on my own marriage. Living with Julian during that week was the hardest acting I've ever done. I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to smile when he came home, ask about his day, and listen to his elaborate stories about his clients and his deals. I felt like a fraud in my own home. My beautiful, perfect loft started to feel like a prison. Every object a reminder of a life I now knew was a lie. He must have sensed my distance because the gaslighting started. It was subtle at first. He'd put his hand on my forehead and tell me I felt warm, that I was probably stressed. He told me I seemed withdrawn and suggested I was working too hard. He said things like, "Ilara, you need a break. All this pressure is making you imagine things." He was trying to build a narrative where my unease was the problem, not his behavior. He was painting me as unstable, a classic manipulator's trick. It might have worked a few months ago, but now his fake concern just fueled the cold fire burning inside me. I knew I wasn't crazy. I was just waiting. The waiting ended a week later, at 2 a.m. An email from Marcus landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Initial report." Julian was asleep beside me, breathing deep. I crept out of bed, took my laptop into the guest bathroom, and locked the door. It was pounding against my ribs so hard, I thought Julian might hear it from the other room. With trembling hands, I opened the attached file. It was worse than I could have imagined. There were photos. Long lens, grainy, but clear enough. Julian in the Hamptons, walking on a beach, his arm around a woman. A girl, really. She couldn't have been more than 25. They were holding hands, laughing. He was looking at her with a light in his eyes I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Then there were the bank records, a separate account I'd never known about. He'd been making regular, weekly transfers from our joint savings. Small enough to go unnoticed, but they added up to thousands. He wasn't just cheating, he was funding a whole other life with our money. With my money. I sank down onto the cold marble floor, the laptop screen casting a ghostly blue light on my face. The betrayal was so profound, so calculated. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. He had built an entire world behind my back. I wasn't just a wife to him. I was a front, a cover story, and the man I thought I knew, the man I loved, simply didn't exist. The 3 weeks after I saw those photos were the longest of my life. I was living in a state of suspended animation, ghost in my own home. I moved through my days on autopilot, perfecting the role of the loving, oblivious wife. I'd smile, I'd cook his favorite meals, I'd listen to his phone calls, feigning disinterest while my mind cataloged every name, every location, every slip of the tongue. My conversations with Chloe and Marcus were whispered, encrypted messages sent from the bathroom or the back of a taxi. My life had become a tightrope walk over an abyss, and I was terrified of looking down. Julian, sensing the shift in me wasn't going away, ramped up his campaign to prove I was the one who was broken. He started leaving brochures for wellness retreats on my nightstand. One evening, he sat me down, his face a perfect mask of concern, and told me he had booked us an appointment with a renowned couples therapist. He said he was worried about my increasing anxiety and that he just wanted his free Alara back. I could see the strategy so clearly now. He wasn't trying to fix us. He was trying to get a professional to co-sign his story that I was unstable, creating a narrative he could use against me later. I calmly agreed to go, knowing it was just another stage I had to perform on. The real truth didn't arrive in a late-night email. It came in a thick, heavy manila folder. Marcus hand-delivered it to my design studio, a place I had always considered my sanctuary. He didn't stay. He just placed the folder on my desk, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Be prepared, Alara. This is worse than the affair." His look of pity was more terrifying than any warning he could have given. After he left, I locked my office door and stared at the folder. It felt radioactive. For a full 10 minutes, I just sat there, my hands shaking too badly. Finally, I took a deep breath, tied the string. The first document was a corporate filing. Julian's consulting, the one with the glossy website and the prestigious address, was a shell corporation. Marcus's report stated it hadn't had a single legitimate client in nearly 5 years. 5 years. The expensive dinners, the trips to St. Bart's, the boxes from Cartier, all of it. Where did the money come from? The next set of documents answered that question. They were bank records, but not ours. They belonged to other people, retirees, small business owners, people who had trusted Julian with their life savings. I saw their names, their account numbers, the flow of their money into his shell company. And I saw the flow out. Small, regular payments to a handful of early investors to keep them happy, and massive, irregular withdrawals for jewelry, luxury hotels, and cash. It wasn't a business. It was a Ponzi scheme. The words on the page seemed to vibrate. My husband, the man I loved, was a predator, ruining innocent lives to fund his I felt sick, a wave of nausea washing over me, but I forced myself to keep reading. And that's when I found the file that made my world truly stop. It was a stack of loan agreements, multi-million-dollar loans taken out against his fake company, and there, at the bottom of each one, was the signature of the loans guarantee. The signature was elegant. He had used my name. He had used the reputation of my company, the one I had bled for, to give his scam an air of legitimacy. He had turned my success into his shield. I wasn't just the wife of a con man. In the eyes of the law, I was his business partner. My name was the bedrock of fraudulent empire. When it all came crashing down, and it would, he wouldn't be the only one buried in the rubble. He would take company and my entire future down with him. He had insulated himself with my life. I dropped the papers. They scattered across my beautiful, custom-designed desk like dead leaves. I slid out of my chair and onto the floor, my back against the wall, and I finally broke. A strangled sob tore from my throat. The tears weren't just for the affair anymore. They were for the 5 years of lies, for the innocent people he'd ruined, for the terrifying legal trap he had so carefully built around me. But as I sat there, gasping for breath on my office floor, something began to shift. The despair was so total, so absolute, that it burned itself out, leaving behind something else, a cold, hard, incandescent rage. The tears stopped. My breathing steadied. He thought I was his shield, his victim, his escape. He had no idea he had just created his worst. I didn't stay on my office floor for long. Rage is a powerful. I gathered the scattered papers, stacked them neatly back into the folder, and called Chloe. I met her at her firm's high-rise office an hour later. It was after 9 p.m., and the building was a ghost town. But her office was lit up a beacon in the dark. We spread the contents of Marcus's folder across a massive mahogany conference table, the evidence of my husband's crimes laid bare under the cold, fluorescent lights. Chloe walked me through the legal nightmare. The forged signatures made me a liable party. The flow of money, however small, from his shell company into our joint accounts could be framed as me benefiting from the crime. In a courtroom, Julian's narrative of my instability could be used to paint me as either a willing accomplice or a negligent fool. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had checkmated me. For 2 days, we barely slept. We ordered food in, fueled by coffee and a cold, shared fury. We dissected every document, every transaction, every legal precedent. My part was to provide the context, the personal details, the texture of his lies. Chloe's part was to find the cracks in his fortress, and then, in the early hours of the second morning, she found it. A clause in our prenuptial agreement. Julian had insisted on the prenup, claiming it was to protect his family money. But he'd made a mistake. In his arrogance, he'd agreed that any property purchased with funds from the sale of a premarital asset would remain the sole property of the original owner. Our Soho loft was purchased with the money I got from selling my very first apartment, the one I bought long before I ever met him. Chloe looked up from the document, and for the first time in 48 hours, she smiled. She told me the loft was mine. Legally, ethically, and in the eyes of the law, it was untouchable. It was the one piece of our life his rot hadn't infected. And it was then we stopped planning a defense. We started planning an attack. The hardest part was going home and playing the part of the devoted wife. But now, I had a script. Chloe's instructions were clear. Keep him calm, make him feel safe, and above all, make him believe he was winning. So, I did. I went to the therapy session with him, cried. I told the therapist I felt lost, that I knew I'd been distant and I was afraid of losing him. I played the part so well, Julian looked at me with a renewed sense of ownership. He was smug. He thought he had me back under his control. That night, feeling emboldened, he made his fatal mistake. We were having dinner, and I was being the perfect, attentive wife. I told him he was right, that my work had consumed me, and that I was sorry for ever doubting him. His guard was completely down. He took my hand across the table and told me he had something exciting to share. He said he was about to close the biggest deal of his career, a once-in-a-lifetime investment that would set us up for life. To finalize it, he explained, he needed to take one last big trip. A solo trip. He pulled out his phone to show me where he was going. Bali, he said, his eyes gleaming. He was trying to frame it as a stressful, high-stakes business negotiation. He said it would be for 2 weeks, and because of the sensitive nature of the deal, he would be almost completely off the grid with minimal cell service. He thought he was selling me a story of his professional success, a story that would reassure me of our brilliant future together. He was so confident in his own lies, so sure of my gullibility, that he didn't see what he was really doing. He wasn't just telling me about a trip. He was giving me a confession. The big deal was obviously the final cash grab of his scheme, and his destination wasn't a business center, it was a romantic hideaway. But most importantly, he had given me a clear, unchangeable timeline. 2 weeks, 14 days where he would be in the air or on a beach with his mistress, completely unreachable. He thought he was laying the groundwork for his escape. He had no idea he was handing me the blueprint for his destruction. The 2 weeks before Julian's flight to Bali were the final act of our charade. I became the most devoted, supportive wife imaginable. I helped him pick out resort wear, telling him he needed to look his best for his big deal. I listened with feigned interest as he talked in vague, important-sounding terms about offshore entities and emerging markets. Every word was a lie, and every lie was a stone in the foundation of the prison he was building. But I smiled through it all, a perfect porcelain mask of adoration. Inside, I was a machine of cold calculation. Every day was a countdown. Every night, after he fell asleep, I would lie awake, my mind racing, refining the steps of the plan Chloe and I now referred to only as the takedown. Our secret war council continued. Chloe had moved from planning to execution. She was discreetly engaging forensic accountants and lining up legal filings, ready to be deployed the moment Julian's plane was in the air. My role was on the home front. I was the operative behind enemy lines. Chloe's latest instruction was haunting. She told me that for the FBI to fully untangle me from Julian's web, we needed more than just the financial proof. We needed to understand his endgame. What was his plan for me? Was he going to simply vanish, leaving me to the wolves? Or was it something more sinister? She said that men like Julian, pathological narcissists, often keep trophies. They document their own brilliance. She urged me to look for something personal, something that would reveal the why behind the what. I had to find the architect's blueprint. My chance came on a Thursday night, just 4 days before his departure. He announced he was going out for a celebratory dinner with his partners, the fictional men who had helped him orchestrate his grand finale. He stood in front of the hall mirror, adjusting his $1,000 tie, a smug grin on his face. He looked at me, his eyes full of condescending affection, and told me not to wait up. The moment the elevator doors dinged shut in the hallway, I sprang into action. I had 3, maybe 4 hours. His home office was his inner sanctum, a cold, minimalist space dominated by a massive steel desk and black leather. It smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. It was the one room in the loft he had designed himself, and it showed. There was no warmth, no personality, just a sterile display of power. I had searched it before, but only for the obvious. Papers, notebooks. This time, I was looking for the hidden. Chloe's words echoed in my head. They keep trophies. I ran my hands under the desk, behind the bookshelves, inside hollowed-out books. Nothing. My heart began to pound with frustration. I moved to his desk, pulling at the drawers. The bottom right one was locked. It had always been locked. Never thought anything of it. Now, it seemed like the most important thing in the room. I retrieved a set of precision screwdrivers from the toolkit I used for my design work, and with my heart in my throat, I began to work on the cheap, flimsy lock. It popped open with a pathetic little click. Inside, there wasn't a secret ledger or stacks of cash. There was just a single, slim black external hard drive. It felt cold to the touch. I took it to my own office, my hands trembling as I plugged it into my laptop. A password prompted. My mind raced. I tried our anniversary, his birthday, his mother's maiden name. Access denied. I tried the names of his shell corporations. Access denied. I felt a surge of time was running out. Then I stopped. Thought about the man, the staggering, boundless ego, the way he saw himself as the master of his universe. I typed in a new password. Master of the game. Access granted. The drive was as meticulously organized as his office. There were folders for his finances, his travel arrangements, a detailed file on Sienna that included her lease agreement, and a log of every gift he'd ever bought her. But one folder stood out, its title simple and chilling, The Alara Project. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. It contained only one file, a text document created over 5 years ago, just weeks after we first met. It wasn't a financial plan. It was a manifesto, a diary of his sociopathic ambition. He wrote about seeing me for the first time at a gallery opening, but he didn't describe my dress or my smile. He described my guest list. He described the way influential people listened when I spoke. He saw me not as a woman, but as a brand. Oh, turnkey solution, he called me, to the life of legitimacy and access he craved. He detailed, with sickening pride, how he had researched me, identified my emotional vulnerabilities, my desire for a true partner, my belief in the good of people. He wrote about his decision to fabricate his entire, knowing my own success would provide him with the perfect The words blurred, or rage filled my eyes. He wrote about his deep, burning resentment of my success. He called me effortlessly lucky, completely erasing the years of 18-hour days I had poured into building my company. He seethed about standing next to me at parties, feeling like the handsome accessory, while everyone knew I was the real power in the room. Then came the final paragraph, the mission statement for his entire 5-year campaign of deceit. He wrote that the money was secondary. The real prize was the narrative. His ultimate goal, his masterpiece, was to use the reputation I had built to create the largest fraud he could imagine. And then, when he disappeared, to have the entire empire of lies collapse squarely on my shoulders. He wanted the world to remember Ilara Vance not as a brilliant designer, but as the fool who bankrupted her own life. Or worse, the criminal who helped him. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was stealing my story. My very identity. He was planting his flag in the ruins of my life. This whole time I thought I was fighting a con man who had betrayed me, but staring at those words on the screen, I finally understood the terrifying. I was fighting an artist whose chosen medium was my destruction. The discovery of Julian's manifesto changed the temperature of my rage from a burning fire to a glacial cold. The personal pain was still there, a raw wound in my soul, but it was now encased in a layer of diamond-hard purpose. He didn't just want my money, he wanted to annihilate my name, my work, my entire existence. My plan for a quiet financial revenge, for simply taking what was mine and disappearing, now felt hopelessly inadequate. You don't just walk away from a forest fire, you have to put it out. I immediately sent a secured copy of the hard drive's contents to Chloe. Her call came within the hour. Her voice, usually so calm and measured, was laced with a fury that matched my own. She told me this document, this Ilara project, was our Rosetta Stone. It proved coercion. It proved his intent to frame me. It was the key that could unlock me from the legal prison he had built. But it also meant we had to change the entire plan. Our original strategy was one of containment and escape. Now, Chloe told me, we had to move to total annihilation. We had to go on the offensive. She said she had a contact at the FBI, a senior agent in the white-collar crime division. It was a massive risk. If we presented the case badly, or if the agent saw me as a panicked co-conspirator trying to get a deal, it could backfire spectacularly, alerting Julian and giving him time to flee for good. But with his manifesto in hand, it was a risk we had to take. We weren't just reporting a crime anymore. We were delivering the criminal, gift-wrapped, with a signed confession. The next 24 hours were a blur of meticulous preparation. In Chloe's conference room, which now felt more like a war room, we assembled what we called the Takedown Bible. It wasn't just a pile of evidence, it was a story. We created a clear, concise timeline of the fraud, with color-coded tabs for each phase. We had the initial PI report from Marcus, the bank statements showing the flow of money, the forged loan documents, and finally, printed in its entirety and placed right on top, Julian's manifesto. I wrote a cover statement, a dispassionate, factual account of my discovery of the lies. I wasn't presenting myself as a victim, I was presenting myself as the investigation's primary source. The meeting took place in a sterile, anonymous conference room at a different law firm, a neutral ground Chloe had arranged. I expected a team of agents, a scene from a movie. Instead, just one man walked in. He introduced himself as Agent Davies. He was in his 50s, with a calm, tired face that suggested he'd seen every possible version of human grief. He didn't offer sympathy. He just nodded, sat down, and said, "Let's begin." For an hour, I walked him through the story, Chloe interjecting with the relevant legal statutes. My voice was steady. I refused to let it shake. I laid out the facts, the discoveries, the web of lies, presenting the evidence in the exact order we had arranged it. Agent Davies listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving mine, his expression unreadable. I felt less like a witness and more like a suspect undergoing a very quiet. He was weighing every word, searching for any inconsistency. Finally, we reached the last document in the file, Julian's manifesto. I pushed it across the table. "This," I said, "is why I'm here. This is what he planned." Agent Davies picked up the pages. As he read, I watched his face. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something behind his professional mask. His jaw tightened. He read passages over again, his eyes scanning the hateful, arrogant words. He was no longer looking at a financial crime. He was looking at a blueprint for a premeditated act of psychological destruction. He saw the full scope of Julian's malice, the calculated cruelty aimed at framing. That document transformed me from a potential person of interest into the state's star witness. He finished reading and placed the pages neatly back on top of the pile. He was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were different. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, professional resolve. He told me this was now an active federal investigation. He explained that my cooperation would be essential and that my safety was their priority. He gave me a burner phone with a single number in it, his direct line. He said to use it for any and all communication. He instructed me to go home and act as if nothing had happened. Julian's trip to Bali was to proceed as planned. They wanted him in the air, unreachable and confident, while they moved in. Walking out of that building and back onto the bustling New York street, I felt the world shift on its axis. The crushing weight of my secret war was gone. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies. Powerful ones. Julian thought he was the master of the game, a brilliant puppeteer pulling all the strings. He had no idea he was now the star of a much bigger show, and the FBI was about to bring down the house. The morning Julian left for Bali was a masterclass in performance art. I drove him to JFK myself. I made sure to look heartbroken, my eyes puffy. I clung to him at the security gate, whispering that I'd miss him terribly, and that 2 weeks felt like an eternity. He held me, but I could feel his impatience, the nervous energy of a man desperate to begin his victory lap. He stroked my hair and told me to be strong, that this was all for us, for our future. It was the last lie he would ever have the chance to tell me. I watched him walk through the gate, turn, and give me one last confident wave before disappearing from view. I held my sad, broken expression all the way back to the car. The moment I closed the door, the mask dissolved. My face was a blank slate of cold resolve. The countdown had begun. My first call wasn't to Chloe or Agent Davies. It was to an old friend, a man named Arthur Brent, the most ruthless and well-connected real estate broker in Manhattan. I'd made him a fortune over the years by bringing him clients from my design projects. I told him I needed to sell my loft. Not in a few months, not in a few weeks. Now, I told him I needed a cash buyer, a closing in under a week, and a level of discretion that bordered on. I didn't give him the whole story, just that it was a sensitive, private matter. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Consider it done." What followed was a controlled demolition of the life I had built. While Julian was sipping cocktails with Sienna on a beach, I was directing a silent, efficient army. Arthur brought in a single potential buyer, a reclusive tech billionaire who had a reputation for wanting things yesterday. He walked through the loft for 15 minutes, his face betraying no emotion, and made an offer on the spot. All cash, 20% over asking, with a 72-hour close. I accepted without a counter. This wasn't about the money anymore, it was about the speed. While the lawyers worked at lightning speed, I began the process of erasing myself. Professional movers, sworn to secrecy with an ironclad NDA, packed every personal item I owned. My clothes, my books, my files, the art I had so carefully collected. All of it went into a secure storage facility under a new company name Chloe had created. I left all of Julian's things untouched. His designer suits hanging in the closet, his expensive watches in their case, his photos on the nightstand. I wanted him to see it all, exactly as he'd left it. A perfect museum of the life he was about to lose. The sale closed digitally on a Tuesday afternoon, less than 5 days after Julian's flight had departed. A number so large it looked fake appeared in my bank account. With Chloe on a video call guiding me, I executed the next step. I initiated a wire transfer, sending every last cent to a newly opened private bank account in Zurich. Then, I systematically visited every bank where we held joint assets. Armed with the legal authority from our prenup, I closed the accounts, liquidated the stocks, and moved the funds. I was a ghost, dismantling a financial empire, leaving nothing but zeros in my wake. But simply taking the money and selling the house wasn't enough. Julian's manifesto proved he was an artist of humiliation. My revenge had to be a masterpiece of the same genre. The confrontation couldn't be a phone call or a letter. It had to be a physical, public, undeniable reality check. The perfect place wasn't a courtroom. It was the front door of the home he thought was his. The perfect time was the very moment he returned, tanned and triumphant from his trip with his mistress. I had Marcus track Julian's return flight. I knew the exact day and the estimated time of arrival. I then reached out to the new owner's legal team with a very specific, unusual request. I asked them to ensure they, along with building security, were present at the apartment on that day, at that time, to formally take possession. I painted a vague picture of a disgruntled party who might be under the impression he still had rights to the property. They agreed immediately, eager to protect their client's new asset. The stage was now set. The actors were in place. All that was left was for the lead performer to arrive. On the final day of his trip, I checked into a suite at the Mandarin Oriental. From my window, I had a perfect sweeping view of the city, my city. His plane was somewhere over the Atlantic, hurtling toward his destiny. My work was done, the money was safe, the evidence was with the FBI, and the throne of his stolen kingdom was now owned by a stranger. He had no idea that he wasn't coming home. He was flying directly into the last scene of a play that I had written just for. From my suite on the 52nd floor, Manhattan was a silent, glittering jewel box. The city that had been the stage for my humiliation now felt like my fortress. I was high above the noise, the chaos, the life I had so carefully dismantled. Down there, Julian's world was about to end, and I was watching from the heavens, a ghost in the machine of my own making. The hotel room was beautiful, impersonal, and blessedly empty of memories. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The last 2 weeks had been a blur of logistics and adrenaline. Now, there was nothing left to do but wait. And in the waiting, the memories came. I thought of the day Julian and I first moved into the loft. I remembered standing in the empty, sun-drenched space, the smell of fresh paint in the air, dreaming of the life we would build. I had believed in that dream with every fiber of my being. A pang of sharp and unexpected hit me. I wasn't mourning. I was mourning the woman I used to be. The one who believed in that, the one who looked at him and saw that woman was a stranger to me, casualty of a war I never even knew I was fighting. I allowed myself to feel that sadness for a final farewell to my own innocence. A soft buzz from the burner phone on the nightstand pulled me back to a text from Agent Davies. It was one word: ready. A minute later, a message from Chloe. The castle is secure. You are untouchable. Now let the dragon fly into the mountain. My team was in place. My shields were up. All that was missing was the dragon himself. As I stood by the window, my laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from Marcus. The subject line read, "A little preview of the co-pilot." Inside was a link and a set of login credentials. It was for an Instagram account, Sienna's. Not her public one, with its carefully curated travel photos, but a private one, for close friends only. I logged in. The page was a nauseating performance of the life Julian had stolen for her. Photos of her dripping in jewelry I recognized, her posing on the deck of a yacht in the Hamptons. And then, the photos from Bali. Her and Julian smiling over champagne, her captions filled with hashtags like living the dream and your couple goals. It was a perfect portrait of their victory, but I wasn't looking at the picture. I was looking at the cracks in the frame. I scrolled deeper, looking at her older posts before Julian. It was the same story, just with different men in different exotic locations. A ski trip in Gstaad with a silver-haired man old enough to be her grandfather. A summer in Ibiza with a man whose face was always conveniently turned away from the camera. It was a digital resume. Sienna wasn't the love of his life. She was a professional parasite, and Julian was just her latest host. Then I saw it. The sign of weakness. It was a story she had posted just hours earlier. A selfie of her and Julian in what looked like the airport lounge. She was beaming, but Julian, visible over her shoulder, wasn't smiling. He was looking down at his phone, his brow furrowed with a tension that was unmistakable to me. He wasn't a man relaxing after the score of a lifetime. He was a man running the numbers, already focused on his next move. The caption Sienna wrote underneath was even more revealing. "Ready for our real life to begin. NYC, here we come." There was a desperate, grasping quality to it. She wasn't his partner. She was his liability. And she was about to find out that the company she had invested all her time in was utterly bankrupt. Their alliance wasn't a fortress. It was a sham built on mutual exploitation, and it was about to crumble under the slightest pressure. Another notification popped up on my screen, this one from the flight tracker app Marcus had installed for me. He was here. I took a deep, slow breath. The waiting was over. I walked back to the vast window, looking down at the endless river of headlights flowing over the bridges and into the city. He was in one of those cars, speeding home, full of arrogance and victory. He thought he was the architect of my ruin. He thought he had the perfect plan, but he had forgotten one crucial thing. I was a designer. I knew how to build things, and I knew how to tear them down to the studs. He had no idea the welcome party I had designed just for him. The story of Julian's return is my favorite part. I wasn't there to see it, of course. My presence would have ruined the sublime artistry of it all, but I had every last detail pieced together for me afterward, from Marcus's minute-by-minute report, from the building's crystal-clear security footage, and from sworn testimony in a federal courtroom. And this is exactly how the king fell. He swept into the Soho lobby at 6:15 p.m., tanned and triumphant from his 2 weeks in Bali, with Sienna on his arm. He was the picture of success, a man returning to his kingdom. I was told Frank, the doorman who'd known us for years, had a look of profound pity in his eyes, but Julian was too high on his own victory to notice. He gave Frank a condescending nod and strode to the elevator, leading his prize to her new gilded cage. I imagine in the silent ride up to the penthouse, he probably whispered to her about the incredible future that awaited them. He guided her down the familiar hallway to our front door. He slid his key into the lock. The same key he had used 1,000 times, but this time it didn't turn. Security footage showed a slight furrow of his brow. He tried again, jiggling it with more force. Nothing. Sienna stood by, her perfect smile starting to falter. His confusion quickly curdled into ugly, impatient anger. He was a king being denied entry to his own castle. He was about to start banging on the door when it swung open from the inside. But it wasn't me standing there. It was a well-dressed man in his 60s, a complete stranger, who looked at Julian with an expression of mild annoyance. Behind him stood 2 other men in severe dark suits, holding iPads. Building security flanked the doorway. Julian immediately tried to take control, his voice booming in the hallway. He demanded to know who these men were, what they were doing in his home. The silver-haired man at the door didn't raise his voice. He calmly informed Julian that he was trespassing. He explained in clear, unequivocal terms that the property had been legally sold 5 days prior by its sole and rightful owner, Ms. Alara Vance. The blood drained from Julian's face. He began to stammer, saying it was impossible, a mistake, that I would never. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking to call me. Of course, the number had been disconnected. Then came the second phase of the demolition. He pulled out his wallet, the arrogance returning for a moment. He would show them. He would book a suite, handle this misunderstanding later. He presented his black Amex, the symbol of his entire fraudulent existence. The lawyer's associate held up a small card reader. Declined. Julian snatched the card back, his eyes wide with disbelief. He tried his Visa. Declined. He was sweating now, his composure shattering in front of his new girlfriend and a line of impassive strangers. As a last resort, he tried his debit card. The machine beeped once. Insufficient funds. In the space of a single minute, he had been rendered homeless and penniless. Sienna, I'm told, took 2 slow steps back. Her dream life had evaporated before her very eyes, and she was already calculating her exit strategy. Julian stood there, utterly broken, a man without a kingdom or a dollar to his name. He was at the absolute bottom of the well, and that's when the elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. Agent Davies stepped out, flanked by 2 other federal agents. They didn't rush. They walked toward the tableau of humiliation with a calm, deliberate pace. Agent Davies stopped directly in front of the man I once called my husband. He addressed Julian by his full name. He informed him that he was under arrest on behalf of the United States government. As he spoke, one of the other agents smoothly moved behind, pulling his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I have never heard. I've watched the security footage a dozen times. I've watched as Julian's face registered the final, irreversible. I've watched Sienna already talking to the other agents, her hands gesturing, her face a mask of shocked, already performing the role of his next victim. The man who tried to erase me, to steal my name and leave me in ruins, was being escorted away in handcuffs. Just another common criminal in a designer suit. His great masterpiece was a failure. Mine was just beginning. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. The morning after Julian's arrest, our story was everywhere. "The Soho scammer," screamed the New York Post. Manhattan's phantom financier read a more dignified headline in the Times. I watched it all from the quiet seclusion of my hotel suite, a ghost watching the world react to a tragedy I had authored. It was surreal to see my life distilled into sensational sound bites. They showed pictures of our beautiful loft, of us smiling at charity events, and of Julian, haggard and defeated in his courtroom sketch. Sienna, of course, gave a tearful primetime interview within 48 hours, painting herself as a naive girl swept up in the lies of a monster. I watched her performance, not with anger, but with a kind of detached admiration for her craft. We were both survivors, just with very different playbooks. The months that followed were a marathon of legal proceedings. Julian's defense was exactly what I expected. A desperate, pathetic attempt to paint me as the vengeful, manipulative mastermind behind the entire scheme. His lawyers argued that I had discovered his affair and, in a fit of rage, framed him to take everything. It was a good story, but I had a better one, and mine had proof. The Alara Project Manifesto was the prosecution's centerpiece. In Julian's own words, his intent was made crystal clear. He had confessed to his crime long before he was ever caught. My day in court was the real final confrontation. I had to walk past him to get to. I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't look, not once. He was irrelevant. I looked at the jury, at the judge, and at the assistant U.S. attorney question. For 6 hours, I told my story. My voice was calm, my hands were steady. I walked them through the discovery of the affair, the hiring of Marcus, the unearthing of the Ponzi scheme, and the sickening violation of finding my forged signature on millions of dollars in loans. I wasn't a victim recounting a trauma. I was an expert witness detailing the methodical takedown of a criminal enterprise. I was taking my name, my story, and my power back, word by word, under oath. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. Guilty. On all 27 counts. At his sentencing, the judge called him a financial predator of the highest order, who not only stole money, but sought to psychologically demolish the very person whose success he used as a shield. He was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I watched them lead him away. A diminished man in a cheap suit, his charm and arrogance finally extinguished, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a number in a system. I didn't stay in New York to watch the fallout. The city and the loft were haunted by a life that was never real. I sold everything else, packed a few suitcases, and bought a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. I needed the sun, the ocean, the feeling of a new frontier. Today, I'm sitting on the balcony of my house in Beverly Hills. It's a house I designed and built for myself. From here, I can see the Pacific Ocean, vast and calm and endless. My new design studio, Vance Interiors, opened 6 months ago, and it's already more successful than my old one. Here, my name is my own. The money from the loft sale wasn't a settlement. It was a seed. And from it, I have grown an empire that is authentically, unshakably mine. Sometimes I think about Julian, not with anger or even I feel nothing for him. And that's the final twist, the one that never made the headlines. My ultimate victory wasn't seeing him in handcuffs. It wasn't the 20-year prison sentence. It was the profound, quiet realization that the woman he tried to destroy doesn't even exist anymore. He thought my identity was my social standing, my perfect loft, the name he married. He was wrong. That was all just a set I had designed. My real identity, my true strength, was forged in the fire of his betrayal. He didn't succeed in erasing me. He just burned away everything that wasn't essential, leaving behind the woman I was always meant to be. I wanted to tell this story, every last detail, not for revenge, but to own it. It's a story that began in a Manhattan penthouse, but it ends here, with the sun on my face and the whole world in front of me. It makes me wonder where all of you are listening to this. What city are you in as you hear my story? Go ahead and write it in the comments below. It's a powerful feeling, knowing that so many voices are out there, listening from all over the world. It's a reminder that we can all find our own new dawn, no matter how dark the night gets.